We've seen what a HQL is and how to use HQL to pull up all the records from a particular table. In this tutorial, we're going to look at a few more ways in which we can configure the results that we get from using HQL. Before we get started, there are a couple of changes that I'd like to make to our code that we wrote in our earlier tutorial. I want to use generics, and this is actually a list of users, so I'll declare it as a list of user details. So what I'm doing here is that I'm getting the values of all the users in the list, and we know for a fact that these are a list of users. So I'm going to use the list of user details as generic, and I'm going to cast this. Because as far as the query.list is concerned, it's just returning a list. Okay, so now what I'll do here is, after I have closed the session, instead of just displaying the count, I'll display all the records. So I'll say for users. I'm just gonna print get username. It's as simple as that. Now this will be helpful because of a few things that we're going to look at in this tutorial. We need to understand the data that's getting pulled up. Okay, so now I have again, I'll just quickly recap what we did in our earlier tutorial. We used a query object to pull up all the records from the user details table. What we did was we mentioned the class name, and Hibernate managed to pull up all the data. And we also saw how to use a where clause to restrict the data that we get. I'm going to remove the where clause for this example. And then once we used the query object to get the list by using the query.list method, then we use this, we got this user list, and we displayed the count. Now what we're doing is we're displaying the name of each of those users. Just to make sure everything is right, we'll run it once and see that we are getting the list of users. Fine. Okay, so now the change that we noted in this kind of query when it compares to a SQL query is that, first of all, Hibernate does a lot of work for us. It takes the data that it's a result of the query, and it converts it into entity objects, and it hands it over to us. In a way, it's good because it saves a lot of trouble. But then the problem is that you do not have a lot of control. For example, say you want to have control over what columns get pulled up. You don't want to pull up the entire object. Say, for example, I'm just interested in the username. In this example itself, I have no need for the user ID, but Hibernate manages to pull that up as well. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I do not want all the users to be retrieved. I want to do a pagination kind of mode. I want to get the first set of users and then fire another query to get the second set of users, and so on. I don't want to get the whole list of users, because again, this is going to be a problem if the number of users are huge. You don't want to get all of them at once. So these are the two problems that we're going to address now. The first thing that we're going to look at is pagination. How does Hibernate support pagination? The way Hibernate supports pagination is configuring this query object that we've got over here. So now that I have created the query, now I can configure what is the page that I need from the database. I do that by using the query dot set first result. Now the query.setFirstResult allows me to set what is the start of my results that I'm interested in. Now if I I want to start from, say, row number 5, so I do a query.setFirstResult 5. Now this will make sure that among the data that gets pulled up, let's say for example it was a select star from, okay, and you got 10 records. So what query.set first result would do is, starting from the first record of a select star, it would go 5 results below, and then that would be the first result. So I can skip the first set of records and I can start my result, the one that I'm interested in. I can start from any one particular point. So that will be the first result for me. Okay, so there's one more property here called query dot set max results. Query.set max results allows me to tell Hibernate what is the maximum number of records that it needs to pull up for a list, query.list. So I can say I need say 4 records. So what happens is Hibernate will pull up records, and then once it reaches 4 records, it's going to stop there and it's going to return me the list, even though there are more records available. So essentially what we're doing is we are starting from a particular point which I can configure, and we are ending at a particular point which I can configure. So this is in essence how you can manage pagination. So I can specify the start and end points. The start point is by directly mentioning the number of records, the nth record from which I need to get the data, and the end point is by specifying the number of records that I need. So it'll be this plus this, that would be the end. So now let's have a look at what's the data that Hibernate pulls up in this scenario. So now I run this. Started from record 5, since our list of users is not starting from 0, it's starting from 1. So the first record is user 6. And then what it has done is it has pulled up 4 records, because we have said the max result is 4. So even though there is a user 10, it's not pulling that up, it's stopped at user 9. And note what's happening here. The configuration that we've given has actually affected the select query. So here you can see there is a user detail limit and offset. So these are the two properties that that is a direct result of our configuration. So whatever configuration you make, it gets translated to the SQL query that Hibernate generates. So you're going to end up with only those records, because Hibernate only queries for those records. So this makes it a more efficient, first of all, and then you can control the data that you're going to get out of Hibernate. So this is the one way you can use pagination. So what ideally you would do is that you would probably have a method which takes a start point and the end point, or the start point and the number of results, and whatever view you have to configure the pagination. Maybe you have a drop down for number of results per page, that would probably go to the set max results, and you'll probably have page by page view with a next and a previous, and each page would decide what the first result is. So this makes it very simple for you to implement pagination in in either as a web page or as a simple Java application, as long as you've written a method which takes these two parameters, and then you can dynamically get the right page by passing the right parameters. Okay, so now pagination is done. Now we'll look at another option, another configuration that we can do. Earlier I told you that if you do a create query, it's going to pull up the entire record. So when I'm saying from user details, each object that it gets pulled up has all the values populated in it. Now I have in my user details, I have user ID and username. So in this list that I get here, the username and the user ID is populated. Of course, we've already seen lazy loading. So if the if the property happens to be a list or a collection or something like that, then Hibernate does do lazy loading, and unless you access a getter, it's not gonna load from the database. But let's say all our data are first level data. I don't have any lists here, but I have a huge number of member variables here. And the problem here is that I'm not interested in all of those member variables. Say this is all I'm trying to do. I'm just trying to print the user names. And now if my user object has 10 member variables, there's really no point in pulling up all the 10 member variables. You would want to configure Hibernate to pull up only the username. So you can do that by actually writing the whole select query. So here, earlier we had written just a from user details. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to write select, and instead of the column name, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give the member variable name again. So this is no way different from what we had done earlier. So it's all in the object paradigm. So I'm going to say select member variable name from class name. So what it's going to do is it's going to end up with just this name. It's going to give me a list of names. It's as simple as that. But there is one thing that you need to note. I'm doing a select name from user details. So I'm just selecting one field. I'm just selecting one value. So it's going to be a list of a single value. So what changes here is that the list that Hibernate is going to give me here, it's not going to be a list of user details. It's going to be a list of a string because I'm just pulling up one value and that value happens to be a string. So instead of giving me a list of objects this time, since I'm just pulling up the username, it's going to give me a list of usernames. And since username happens to be a string, it's going to give me a list of strings. So if I run this, now it's going to show me an error. So let me save and run this. So there you see, it's giving me a class cast exception because this list cannot be cast into a list of user details. It's actually a list of strings. So let's change this part of the code. So what I'll do is instead of having a list of user details, I'm going to have a list of strings. So I'll say list string usernames equals query.list. I'm casting it to a list of strings. So this will be user names and this will be a string. So now what I can do is in my system.out.print, I can directly print u because u happens to be a string. So let me save and run this. Well, there you go. I'm able to pull up the names, and the advantage here is that I am limiting the data that Hibernate pulls up only to the record that only to the field that I'm interested in. I don't want to pull up the whole object. I have more than one field here. So let's say I enter select user ID, comma username from user details. Then what would happen is Hibernate would return me a list of lists. So each member of the first level list is going to be a list of two strings, which is the user ID and the username. So you can enter any number of column names or the field names you want, and it's all going to be added to a list. There are a few other ways we can configure this. I'm not going to go into the detail, but I'd recommend you try them out. I can say select new map of user ID comma username, in which case I get a list of map objects. So that it's going to return me a list, and each member of that list is going to be a map, and the map is for the user ID and the username. So these kind of configurations are possible. You can control what is the object that you get in a list. It's going to end up in a list anyway. So the first level is going to be a list, but you can configure what each member of the list is going to be. So before we wind up, there's one last thing I'd like to mention here. The few other things that you can do in a normal select will still apply here. So I can say a select max of user ID. So all the aggregation functions like max, sum, all those things will still work. So Hibernate is going to return me only one value here. So it's just going to get one value, and I can print that. Of course, I'll have to change this, so I'm not going to go into the details. It's going to return me a list with a single integer, and the integer is going to be this maximum user ID. So you can probably try out all these things with the select. Most of the features that a SQL select has will translate well to the select of HQL. The only thing you need to note is that instead of using a column name, you will have to use the property name of the class that you're trying to pull up.